How are you there? Welcome to another episode of Film Crack Crack with myself, Nicholas O'Shea Khan, and over there.
It's me, Clive Davis. Hello.
If you haven't ever seen an episode of Film Crack Crack, you need to understand that we're talking about movies that maybe haven't seen the light of day very much, films that have kind of disappeared for one reason or another. And this is a particularly interesting example of that. This is a movie that has been very rarely seen since it was made. And for reasons in part that the people who made it actually decided they didn't want to commercialize in any way, because they felt it would rob it of some of its power. And I wonder too, though, in Japan, if it wasn't seen because of some of the fallout of what happened after the film was made.
Yeah, we'll get to that, but I'm wondering how sound a decision this is in a way. It strikes me as slightly counterproductive, which lends weight to your theory a little bit, if it might be, erring on the side of caution or something.
But the film is called Yama Attack, To Attack. It has a subtitle as well, which I can't remember what it is, like a further title.
I don't think it's To Attack. It's just Attack.
Is it two?
Yeah,
Yama Attack, To Attack.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I assumed it was the Japanese and attack.
No, because I think the original is Yama Yara Yararetara Yarikaise.
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
Which I think is kind of like an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth kind of.
Right. Yes.
Thing.
Okay.
I always get confused. The most difficult part of the language for me is that those conjunctions where the construction lets you know if you're the person being talked about or if it's the person you're those always confuse me. The only one I always remember is Ijimera Reko, because it's the girl to be bullied or girl who likes to be bullied. I don't know why I recall that one.
Okay.
But in general, it's quite, I always have a hard time with...
But this film has two directors, and that's an important part of its story. It has a director called Sato Mitsuo, and then we'll get into why he didn't finish the film, and then it was finished by another director, Yamaoka. Is it Kyoichi, maybe? Or Kyoichi?
Kyoichi, yeah. Yeah, and to be fair, Sato-san has a very good excuse for not finishing the film.
For not finishing, yes, for sure.
Not just being lazy, even though he's seen lying down at the very beginning of the film. Yes.
And so it seems like, maybe, you know as much as I do about it, possibly even more, having been to some of the sites where you said this was made. But this is all basically set in the bubble years of the economy, right? It's kind of 1984, 1985.
Right.
When Japan is kind of doing really well in many ways, right? There's tons of money everywhere. And yet this movie explores this like ruthlessly exploited kind of underclass of day laborers who all live in this although it kind of does dip around to other parts of Japan which have similar kind of communities, but it's mostly focused in this Sanya, if I'm saying that right. Which is where in Tokyo exactly? This is something that I...
Yeah, so, because it hasn't been called Sanya for a very long time.
Right.
So it's now the area... Well, it's not even really there. I'll talk a bit about that later as well, but it's kind of spread across a few districts, but it's very small, but it's basically south of Minami Senju.
Okay.
And to the northeast of Asakusa.
Okay.
And nearby, like Yoshiwara as well, the Soul district.
The old red light district, yeah. Right, and basically it was a kind of an area full of these flop houses, more or less, and a place where a lot of these day laborers kind of slept out in the streets. And that was something that struck me. I realized as I was watching this that I had kind of whitewashed some of my memories of Tokyo. Things came flooding back to me about not just seeing quite a lot of people living under bridges and stuff, and then, you know, but then like nighttime going through certain train stations and there's being people everywhere on these cardboard mats in kind of, and I sort of scrubbed that. And I was like, oh yeah, this is still very much, or at least it was. I mean, that's 10 years ago now and longer.
Less so because of, you know, again, we had the Olympics again, right? So there's always a kind of cleanup campaign and out of sight, out of mind and all that. I'm sure it'll creep back.
Right. But yeah, I was a bit disturbed by my ability to just do what this movie is exactly trying to say, is that everyone else obviously in Japan was doing, which was just turning a blind eye and kind of ignoring this, you know, situation where these workers were really the backbone, it seems, of a lot of the construction going on in Japan during the boom, and yet they had no proper way to you know, kind of negotiate for their rights and stuff like that. So
right, yeah, no, it's yeah, how everything had been subcontracted out to milk as much profit as you could get. And yeah, by the time you got to the bottom, I mean, people are left without a safety net or any form of health insurance or work insurance.
And so one question I had for you, maybe you can answer this, because I noticed later in the film I started hearing the word and I was like, oh yeah, okay. So that's early in the movie. Do they say Barakumin clearly? Yes. So when they said the subtitle word is outcast that they use, right? So is this why Sanya is not called Sanya? Is it because it was because I know that they've done this a lot in Japan, where any places that were known Barakumin kind of okay, and I guess to people who don't know who they are, you might want to explain.
This is one of those terms as well that's always slightly confounded me. I kind of know what it means. And it's a word that isn't used anyway anymore. It's considered a kind of effective word. But I guess a combination of people of I guess in family businesses, areas that are considered like I don't know, in
taboo
or at the very bottom of the
so people dealing with night soil, or people dealing with
tanners,
dead bodies, right? And
and stuff as well. And I think around that area, Minami-Senju would have been an area of a lot of across like the northwest of the Yamanote line loop. I think a lot of around there was once upon a time, you know, more than anything else, like a lot of activity there that just stank. Like a lot of stuff just smelt bad, you know. So I think it's a mixture of that, but also and I suppose
it became like a caste. It almost became like a caste thing too, right? Where you couldn't stay if your family had done that job, you weren't going to be marrying up in the world or getting a job in a bank.
Yeah, and there's a certain amount of ethnic stuff mixed up in it as well, then, right? Because certain people, obviously, because they couldn't get work doing anything else, they would end up and they'd get into this kind of vicious cycle. And the last I recall, there was a scandal in, I think, the 80s, around probably about the time that this film came out. There was apparently this like the big book of Barakumin or something that was doing the rounds at a lot of the big companies, and it was basically just a list of like family names of people from certain districts, and you know, who were, I guess, trying to escape their past. But this book was like highlighting, no, this person is from, you know, this background and therefore is untrustworthy, so they can't work here at, you know, Mitsubishi or whatever. Which is kind of amazing now, and to think that was a thing, right? That there was this kind of Bible of you know, traveling around all the, you know, so whenever anyone was thinking of recruiting, let me just 5 minutes, and they'd go in the other room and, aha, this guy comes from, you know, the wrong side of the tracks.
I can remember having a heated conversation with a student of mine in Yokohama, and she absolutely was on the side of like, those people should be known, and like if you married one, it would be ruin upon you and your family. And you know, like she was, and I was kind of like, humans are humans, like you know, and yeah, but no, she was completely adamant that those maps should be available to everybody, and we should all know who they are.
Like, and that was just 10 years ago or something.
10 years ago. Yeah, and she was younger than me.
Right. It is a strange one, because again, I'm not exactly sure what the root of, like a lot of things. Sometimes when you try and dig back and you know, I'm still not quite sure what people were objecting, because it seems so petty.
Yeah,
it's almost like you second guess it and you think, oh, there's got to be a reason, right? There's got to be something else behind it, but I've never quite figured out.
Before we go too far down that path and
right.
lose sight of the movie, I will say that if you go back and read, you know, and I know, you know, it's like, it's not history, but it is based on history. But if you go back and read things like, you know, Lone Wolf and Cub, the comics and stuff, there's a lot of talk about how, for example, you know, if you were a samurai, you couldn't just go work as a farmer. Like you were forbidden, like that things were so stratified that, so in that way, it does make sense to me that there were these rigid castes, you know, all the way through Japanese society at the time that you couldn't really escape. And that's why so many of the, you know, once the daimyos, if they fell and all of their retainers ended up, you know, without work, it was very hard for them to find work other than to be assassins, right? Because if you couldn't make your money by the sword, you were kind of expected to just go starve or commit suicide.
Right. Yeah. Actually, I was thinking about this in a way. This sanyan, the what's it called, the yoseba, the like men looking for work, kind of like a. Oh, hang on, I've turned on my device. Keep going, Nick.
Okay, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say in your absence, but yeah, I'm going to wait for you to come back, Clive. We'll just right. This can be a pleasant, quiet moment for the audience while they
to reflect
on what ruminate
has been said so far. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Yoseba, the kind of cattle market for laborers. It would remind me as well of a book I've not read, but I'd like to. Is that one Ronin Guy, which is kind of basically a similar, you know, a street of Ronin who kind of just hang about and don't have anything to do, and looking for a purpose in life.
But so it's interesting. So clearly, you know, the first director, Sato, is very clear about his intentions, that this movie is kind of is like going to be a hand grenade lobbed at Japanese society, like that he is like, right. This is a fighting film. I am taking the side of these people who the rest of the country is ignoring or exploiting.
I'm sorry, I think we should reiterate, because we know what we're talking about, but I think we may have failed to actually make it crystal clear. So yeah, so these areas we talked about the historic, but at this point in time, full of flop houses and full of day laborers who kind of like, I suppose, people might be familiar with, in Southern California, for instance, people cluster in certain areas to be chosen to go and pick fruit or something.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
So exactly the same thing. Very early in the morning, men would cluster in the streets, and various brokers working for construction companies would choose people, you know, like you.
Yeah.
They'd go and do their day's work and then come back at the end of the day and drink, basically. And
one of the most astonishing images is the one where they start rolling up the screens or whatever, like the kind of like the garage door kind of things, you know, those, you know, and these guys just start like swarming underneath it, like trying to be first in line to see if they can get a job. And it's just like, holy shit. It's and just the absolute meat market, the absolute cattle kind of herd, and everyone just kind of jostling. Those scenes were like jarring to me.
And also you just the logistics of it, you wonder, like, how are they keeping track of who's who, because they're rushing up, like you said, and they're giving like their cards as well, right? And you're wondering how are they keeping track of all this? This is just it seems so frenetic, yeah.
And so I guess this is where, so you have the brokers, and they're obviously getting their piece of the action, and then you have this kind of unholy nexus that shows up also in that Tokyo Underworld book. That's a great book to read if you really want to get a clear image of how the far right, the ultranationalists in Japan, and organized crime, and the big companies, and the Liberal Democratic Party, which has kind of been the ruling party in Japan for a long time, all kind of, it's like a Venn diagram with a worrying amount of overlap. And in this we see clearly that this combination of the police plus these right-wing nationalists plus the mafia, all kind of, in a way, at the behest of these big companies who want these guys to work for nothing, just kind of work to keep them in their place. And whenever they try to kind of push back or ask for more rights, then one of these groups, whether it's the Yakuza, whether it's the right-wingers, or whether it's just the police themselves, go in to break heads,
Yeah, there's because so we should mention Sato Mitsuo, as you said. So at the very beginning of the film, we actually see him, dying in the street because he was actually murdered.
Yeah.
By those. Well, I mean, was it either because the other director, Yamaoka Kyoichi, who also ended up being killed
after the movie came out. Yeah.
And I can't remember which one, and maybe both of them. I think the person responsible, they fessed up, right? They actually. They killed him. They went.
The one who killed the first director, Sato, went right to the police and did a thing that shows up in a lot of. Actually, it even shows up in Yakuza movies, but it also shows up a lot in Yakuza books. Showed up and admits to killing him, but doesn't admit to it being a hit. Says basically, I got in an argument with this guy. I don't know who he was, and gives the wrong name, as though it was an accident or a misunderstanding, so that it's not.
It's not premeditated.
For the police write it up as non-premeditated and not hit, right?
So you get a shorter sentence, I guess.
Which is disgusting. A whole bunch of levels.
Well, yeah, but also it's a weird mix of the ignoble, but also at least they do kind of fess up kind of thing rather than just try to get away with it. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Because you would think you would be able to just get away with it as well, right? I mean.
Right, but then it almost seems like that was a built-in safety valve. Like the police needed somebody, and the mafia knows that the police need somebody. So you know what I mean? In that way,
you scapegoat, and I'm sure the person charged with doing it, knows in advance. You're going away for a while, but you're taking one for the team.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But yes, they both did end up dead, and yes, to your point. Clearly, I mean, they would have been aware of the potential for that. I don't know if they would have expected to be murdered exactly, but they certainly would have expected pushback. And because of that, I don't know if it's just because because we kind of knew and they mentioned it early on in the film as well, that at least one of the directors has died. Obviously, we don't know the second one because it was after the film had premiered. Yeah. But because of that looming over it, there's scenes where, for instance, kind of this kind of Isats kind of union, or the people kind of fighting on behalf of the laborers. There's scenes of them like berating,
really haranguing
in public, whether they be officials or sometimes guys who clearly look like
mafia,
right? Yeah. And
one of the construction bosses.
Yeah, there's a look on his face. And and you're just thinking, you're winning this battle, but this dude doesn't look pleased to have been put in his place in public. Like, this is gonna come back on it. There's like this real sense of dread. There's like one guy, I think you're probably thinking the same guy I am. He's got this look on his face, like this frown, and he looks mixture of like stupid, bovine, but also fucking dangerous. Like,
yeah.
And you can just tell he's thinking like, you're a fly that I'm gonna swat whenever I get the chance. And it's and I'll get into later. I have problems with this film, but just that footage alone, and like you said, the people swarming in, just these incredible images, make it a powerful watch. Even though it's kind of a slightly cack-handed film, I think, and tries to do too much. But I'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you have anything?
Well, let me just take a quick. I mean, there was one of the. I think for me, one of the saddest scenes actually is quite near the end. There's the guy who, and so they call themselves the Disputers, or at least I don't know what the actual Japanese word is, but basically this group of kind of activists who are going out there and kind of attempting to kind of draw attention to the plight of these people and also kind of organize them and stuff. But there's the scene where they're just kind of wandering around at night trying to like wake guys up and make sure they don't freeze to death.
Oh yeah,
there's the one guy who's kind of just lying there and he's covered in, I guess he's been covered in snow or water or whatever. They wake him up and that seems really sad for a bunch of reasons. One of which he's really desperate to try to explain to them that like he's trying to get work. Like he went out earlier that day and tried to work. Like he doesn't want to be seen like he's a bum. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he shouldn't grab any dignity that he can. Yeah. But he's paralytic in a pool of snow melt and it's dying, right? So
it's really sad. Like it was a moment where I was like, oh my God, this is grim. Yeah, but you can see that in a obviously there's the guy who worked for the National Railroads who freely admits, I got drunk and it was an accident, and like that's why I'm down here now. Or like some of the people, their life choices led them there, and then there's other people who it seems as though they were just weak in a place where there's people who prey on the weak.
Right.
Like the husband and wife one was a weird one, like where they were kind of forced into like working as chefs for one of these work camps by the Yakuza. Like that was a weird.
Yeah, well, I mean, they were so kind of. Yeah, they were so kind of monosyllabic as well. It was very. You had to kind of read between the lines as well. Mm-hmm. But I think basically they tried to turn her into a prostitute.
Yeah, it seemed like it. And I wondered maybe was there gambling debt, like what was there something that precipitated them? You know what I mean? Right. In that Japanese gangsters are very good at finding some leverage, But the other thing that really threw me was like that it wasn't just about like how these various institutions are failing these people, like the police, like the fact that there's no real way for them to organize without them getting their heads cracked. And then the police going around and dousing their fires at night to let them freeze to death and stuff. But the hospital stuff was super disturbing.
Yeah, so this was, so they talk about the Utsunomiya Hospital scandal, right? Which was new to me, I have to admit. And my wife watched this film with me as well, was like, what's all this about? And I looked around a little bit. It does seem to be a genuine thing. And this was, I guess, from what I could, because again, this film jumps around so much and sometimes without any introduction, sometimes you're like, where are we now? Like, what's this? Like, but I think it seemed to have been like a sort of mental hospital where, but lots of, I guess, street people would have ended up there as well, because like, where else are you going to put them kind of thing? Because they clearly do have mental health issues, but more to do with their situation and they're driven kind of mental rather than it's something I don't know, the
grind of poverty, that just kind of has ground them down.
But apparently one of these places was obviously run by like Nurse Ratchet's more evil younger sister or something. And and there were all these guys getting bullied and humiliated and
in some cases murdered, it sounded like, by male nurses.
Yeah, it was an odd one because it comes and goes, and there's no context for it, and I couldn't dig up much more about it in English.
Mm-hmm.
But it does seem to, I don't think it's something they made up necessarily, but it's yeah. So the problem I have with this film is it tries to do too many things. So I kind of understand how they try and couch these things in, well, if we're talking about this, then you have to kind of talk about this kind of thing, and you have to but I think it went out a bit too wide, and it became a bit of a, you know, greatest hits of kind of leftist because some of it was somewhat propagandistic, I thought. Like, not necessarily that it's not, that this stuff isn't true. I didn't see anything in the film that was false necessarily, but the way they strung it all together, you know, like, see, this is connected, and this and this is, and I was a bit like, I think it's a lot more complex than that, right? It almost made it seem, you know, it had that slight conspiracy theory minded way of looking at the world, like them and us. This is the enemy, and they do this kind of thing. And so I found that slightly problematic if I'm going to be, you know, objective about the film. But like I said, because there's just so much footage of stuff that you've never seen anywhere else, then I think it's kind of an essential view. But it's in spite of itself in a way. What did you have it? Did that strike you, or do you think that's unfair?
I mean, I'm obviously primed in some ways to feel sympathetic towards the goals, right?
Well, yeah, so am I. But that's why I'm trying to not let them get away with something that I wouldn't let someone more right, for instance, get away with it. Yeah.
Funny, I remember when I was watching it, part of me thought, like, this is the film that Michael Moore kind of wishes he had made with Roger and Me, but wasn't able to, right? Because he's not embedded in a way, although he's from Flint, and, you know, but his thing was all about, and that was, I mean, it's funny, I almost feel like the opposite. I feel like it was almost too myopic, and I wanted to know, like, who's going to show up at the shareholders meetings of Mitsubishi to ask why the hell the people pouring concrete on their new buildings are, like, living under bridges in, you know, like, you know, well, like, that's.
I agree with you, but what I mean, I would say that's more focused in a way, like it's more focused on the problem at hand. So, for instance, towards the end of the film, when they go off and they start talking about the desecrated grave
the Korean
race. And I'm thinking, okay, yes, no, this is a story worth telling, or whatever, and it's really fascinating to find out about that. But this is somewhat off topic, right? Like,
yes, fair enough. I would agree with that.
So stuff like that. I mean, I didn't mind when it went further afield. So one thing that was particularly interesting for me to see is when they go to Kamagasaki or Nishinari in Osaka, because I went there. When did I go there? 5-6 years ago, just before they tore down. So that scene you're talking about, where the shutters go up and they, that would have been very much. There was a big building in the middle of Nishinari, and I remember seeing a structure that looked exactly like that. That is to say, like, the first floor was, you know, almost like a market or something with those shutters, and then above it you'd have like a second floor and a third floor, like hall for people to hang out in. And when I went there, obviously it was, you know, there was still quite a lot of homeless around the Nishinari area. I don't know if they're still there now, but there wasn't the big labor market anymore. So, you know, me and a friend went up and we walked through the second floor hall, and there was just guys lying around, just kind of staring into the middle distance, and, you know, just encrusted in filth pretty much. And it was a kind of grim place, but it was very much like the grim kind of remnants, like, and since they've torn the building down, that place doesn't exist anymore. And at night as well, we went out at night, and it was a very vibrant kind of community there was lots of people out and about, very friendly. They'd try and buy you drinks as well from the vending machines, which was like, no, dude, keep your money. I'd like to buy you a drink, kind of thing. But no, that would have, I'd been an affront to their dignity if they had to let them buy you drinks and stuff. But I don't know how much of that is still around, because the focal point has gone. That thing has been torn down.
A few. These are thoughts that are going off in various different directions.
Same as a documentary.
But well, yeah, exactly. One was just for a moment. I just wanted to touch on. I really liked the part where they were all like. I'm assuming it was some sort of fundraiser or benefit or whatever.
Yes.
With like the various different Japanese versions of the Clash. At least two different. Clash-esque sounding, not so much looking bands.
Right.
And I was like, who are those bands? Like, who are those dudes? Who were showing up to like.
Yeah, it's like a summer festival, isn't it? And what I liked about that was there's some kind of hardcore punk on stage, and there's all these people like
old
trying to dance in the old festival style.
It was awesome.
Yeah. So that was quite. I was watching that, and me and my wife were both thinking the same. What you get? And like, there's all these amazing faces, and it almost seems like, and my wife had the same thought. So this wasn't, just like some white guy's opinion. We both kind of thought, wow, these people look like they're from a different era that doesn't exist. It really feels like something that doesn't exist anymore.
I kept seeing like the faces of like the villagers in like the Seven Samurai and stuff, like just those like craggy looking like old Japanese.
It's people you just don't see anymore. And certainly this feels like, maybe a decade more, maybe. But that kind of tail end of the Showa is very much a different time. So as a companion piece to this film, I decided to read, I haven't quite finished it yet, but I've been reading this.
Oh, that's funny, because I just looked that up on Amazon as I was reading about this. Okay.
Yeah. By Edward Fowler. I highly recommend this to you in particular.
Okay.
I think you would very much enjoy this.
Okay, awesome.
So I recommend that. And also I decided, I've been meaning to do it for ages, but I put it off for whatever it is. I decided to actually go to Sanya and see if there's anything left at all, right?
Right.
So I knew it had been pretty much gentrified since the events of the film. And even this book, which is written from about 5 years after the events of the stuff, but it was still a lot of flop houses, and the authors talks about staying in them and getting day labor jobs.
Imagine after the bubble burst, things couldn't have gotten any better for those people. If they were doing that badly when the bubble was at its height. And that was one quick thing I was going to say. I remember during Ireland's Celtic Tiger, which was basically our bubble in the 90s, which, when it burst, brought the whole, it basically bankrupted the country, and it was all much of the same kind of stuff that was in Japan, just rampant speculation and kind of questionable mafia type of people involved. But it never touched the underclass in Ireland either. It just like the money never really filtered right down. It was like middle class people became rich.
Right.
And lower middle class people became middle class. But poor people in Ireland stayed just as poor throughout the whole time.
Right. So I went to have a look. I went to the Minami station. I walked south, and I found there's actually quite a handy map in this book, which still everything's mapped out pretty much the same way. And I was the signs. If you know what you're looking for, the signs are there of what it used to be. There's like certain buildings and stuff. I found one very small building that I'm guessing must have been the only remaining missionary spot, like a little with a big red cross drawn on the door, because the God Botherers always turn up right at these places. And it was pretty much totally gentrified, apart from, I don't know if you remember this from the film. They mention it a lot in this book because this book is specifically Sanya. It doesn't go anywhere else. Tamahime Park, which is, I think, you see it in the doc, and this is the park full of, and then there's like a caged off, like a area for like kids to play sports in, like a little sports field thing. And that hasn't changed at all. That caged off area is
still there.
There's a great picture in this book of like kids playing baseball, and there's like the homeless people just like looming through the bars. And it's just a weird, like, I guess it's always been like kids in the area do go to the park and they're just caged off from the homeless. And that park was still filled with homeless people as well. There was lots of falling. There were a lot of dudes collecting, huge mounds of cans, and things, and so that was still just in the park, and just like a couple of blocks away there was another large park filled with children and kids, but clearly a totally different world just 2 blocks away. It was all kids, mothers and children, and no one welcome there. But Tamahime Park was still blue tarp, lots of people shuffling around. They all looked pretty old. I mean, I didn't see many young people, and still that caged area caged off. So it was interesting to see that it's boiled down to, that's the only thing left is that little square, because it's a very small park, especially when that area has been caged off. What's left over is pretty tiny. So that's still there.
The last thing I kind of want to say about it, and so we touched this, but the second director, who was, I think, even more directly involved in the cooperative that was kind of doing this protesting or this disputing, who then gets murdered after the thing comes out. When you watch it, and as you were saying, there's these scenes, and one of the last scenes of the movie is a guy who actually is a Yakuza or some sort of like low-level kind of flunky, right? Getting basically yelled at by this large group of angry, street people, day laborers, and to the point where he apologizes, and then that was another thing that really struck me, is that like that Japanese wish for an apology, like. Like multiple times across the thing, they're like, you need to apologize, right? And people are, for various reasons, either kind of refusing or kind of hedging. But this guy fully like goes down. And I was like, the optics of that for the mafia must have been infuriating, because it made them.
That's probably why people end up dead, right?
I would think so. I think because this image of like, well, this is what happens if enough people say this is bullshit. You can, I mean, I would imagine that would have been it would have been a loss of face for them, for sure.
And that's a thing, I think, that it's easy for not just non-Japanese. I think this might be a larger Asian thing as well, which is slightly different from European culture. We say save face, and we kind of understand the basic concept, but it's a very serious thing to lose. It's like a different, it's something I don't think we quite can wrap our heads around quite how serious that is. It's a different, it's just a different take on this. But like you said, to actually own it and to fess up and to apologize, there's like no going back then. It's like because you can put it off, you can ignore it, and you can dodge the question, and it's not unseemly to do that somehow, because once you've crossed that Rubicon of admitting it, then it's too late to kind of go back and renegotiate, or once you've admitted it, you've admitted it. And I think that's a slightly different, we don't quite do things in that way.
It's, I guess, one last thing. What's interesting for me watching this is that how much, in some ways, it felt like one of like Fukasaku Kinji's movies. You know, there's parts of it where just the kind of, and like the soundtrack choices were all great. You know, there's some really interesting music on the soundtrack to this.
We'll end with a bit of that, I think.
Yeah, it reminded me of that way in which, like, the mafia, and in the same way the Italian mafia, they're happy with being portrayed in certain ways, like that they don't mind if they're made to seem noble, or if they're made to seem like they're standing up for the little guy, or, you know, but they don't like it when they're shown shitting on the little guy, right? And this is what this movie is all about. And I believe, is that not what got Itami killed as well? He made that movie.
Yes.
It was Minbo no Onna. Yeah. And it was the same kind of thing. It was basically about, we need to stand up to these kind of you know.
And the amazing thing about that is that's a terrible film. I don't know if you've ever watched it.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's not, totally not worth getting tossed off a building for.
It's amazing.
But he wasn't just some local, you know, 20-something, 30s, you know, early 30s.
No, he was an established
guy. He was a major world director.
Yeah. And what amazed me about that was, years before I saw it, I'd heard about it. And this savage satire. And I was really looking forward to something that really got, and that's why, and then I ended up watching it, and it's fucking Carry On Yakuza, right? It's like,
yeah.
It's
but they really didn't like that.
Yeah, they didn't like it at all.
Being made to seem foolish.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is, again,
scummy.
Like, yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's kind of an interesting. I didn't expect it to go in that direction. But yes, it is sometimes. You can, you kind of conceptually get all this, but then when you see the way it plays out, sometimes it's such a different way than it would play out elsewhere. It's a very specific here kind of variation on you know. You have these, you know, labor disputes and predatory acts everywhere, right? Yeah. But it's this flavor of it is
unique to Japan.
Yes. So we don't normally. I think we're done, are we?
Yep.
All right. We don't normally do this. We don't normally play music on Film Crack Rack. But I was so taken by this piece by Kotekitai, which is Wataru Okuma and Masami Shinoda. This is that kind of strange saxophone piece. I believe I sent you the link to, because I found it on YouTube. I don't know what it is about this piece of music. There's something gloriously, I don't know, sleazy, or...
You know what it might be? And this is a terrible connection to make to such a serious film, but it has elements of Mad Fox's. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Anyway, we will close out with some Kotekitai. So until next time, Film Crack Rack. Cheerio.
Care, folks.
Bear in mind, sometimes this doesn't edit properly, so you might not hear that, and it just ends here.